It's about having these honest conversations, and when we debate abstractly, it usually goes nowhere. But when we talk about real people and what women are experiencing and what families are experiencing in Texas and in states across this country, it just shifts the conversation.
Amazing, you and Abby have both been very much involved in this issue of reproductive rights for many years. You've directed at least 2 documentaries on the subject, including Jackson in 2016 and Atavist, The Last Clinic in 2013. But tell us how this particular project came along. Obviously, you were in at very much at a ground floor level as the Center for Reproductive Rights took on this case.
Well, the day of oral arguments in Jackson Women's Health Organization versus Dobbs, we got a call from the clinic director, who was the main participant in Jackson, and so a close friend, and she was at the oral arguments and said, "We're gonna lose. I know we're gonna lose, and I just don't know when the decision's gonna come down." And I was sitting next to Abby when I got that call and, turned to her and said, "We have to make a film." And so we did start at that moment to think about what does a post-Roe America look like? And I think one thing that we never expected was for someone like Amanda and Samantha and Austin, and there are many other plaintiffs, to say no. No, I'm not gonna just let this happen to me. I'm gonna fight back. And so through all of the research and time spent with different women going through being denied abortion care, when we learned of their stories, we knew that that was the narrative thread we had to follow, because it was, amongst all the devastation, a moment of hope and a moment of recognizing that there are gonna be people who are gonna stand up.
And speaking of standing up, Amanda, I'm going to imagine that not too many people in this room have testified before Congress. I certainly have not. And I was amazed that you'd comment on the film like, well, yeah, I wasn't that nervous. I didn't know what to expect. But tell us what it is like to be at a televised congressional hearing when you know that many people up in, seated above you are really antagonistic to your views and would rather someone like you not speak out.
Well, it's true that I really did not know what to expect. And since I testified, a lot of my fellow plaintiffs and other advocates have testified. And I give them a lot of credit because they know what it's going to be like. They know what they're getting into. And I think that takes a different level of bravery to know how scary it might be and do it anyway. With that said, Molly and Mark and the rest of the team at the Center for Reproductive Rights did an excellent job of preparing me for potentially antagonistic questions, but what they said that really ended up being true was most of the people who didn't agree with what I was saying or what I was fighting for were just going to ignore me altogether, and that's exactly what happened. In fact, as I say in the film, my own 2 senators were not in the room when I was testifying. So I think it took a long time for me to process what had happened because it was all so surreal. I don't know how you can, really wrap your head around something like that until you've had some time to really process and debrief. So I think maybe a week afterwards, I was seeing some of the coverage and, hearing from family and friends, and I thought, okay, this is something. And in that moment, I knew, all right, we can take this and we can turn it into something bigger. And I think that's what we've done with the film and with the Center for Reproductive Rights. And it's just something I'm very proud of.
I just cannot imagine that, the poise that you showed in that environment is just amazing. But Abby, it's importantly in the film, you're talking with women who become plaintiffs of different socioeconomic backgrounds, because as we know, so many of these restrictive abortion laws are going to disproportionately affect women of lower incomes, and then that's just sort of the reality there. But can you talk about getting, for instance, Samantha to be part of the film and why that was important to hear from someone of her background?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we were interested in meeting Samantha because she was so quickly adamant that she was going to tell her story publicly. And she was just so remarkable in stepping forward so quickly in the wake of what had happened to her. But you're right that it does disproportionately affect women of color. And we felt it was really important to represent that in the film. And also the center really felt it was important to represent it in their case. And I think it's addressed in the film, but it's something they talk about, that the same barriers to accessing care are the ones that prevent you from joining a lawsuit, because you don't get paid, you give up tons of time, you're away from your family. And so there are huge barriers, and Molly met so many women who shared their stories but ultimately couldn't take the step because it is a huge commitment that all of you took. But I also think it was so important to show the variety of backgrounds that are impacted, because it's not just one cross section of women. It really cuts across all sorts of boundaries, and even political boundaries. These situations happen to people regardless of who they are. Suddenly you're in an emergency situation, and it doesn't matter who you are, even if you have means. If your doctor is saying you can't be more than 15 minutes from the hospital, you can't just fly and go get care. And that's really something that shook me in thinking if I had an issue in Texas, I could travel. And it's really not the case. So.
I think your film was qualified for the Academy Award, so congratulations on that and being an Oscar contender. I think a lot of documentaries that have qualified play differently in a sense after the election. And, one example of that would be a lot of talk about Project 2025 before the election, despite Trump disavowing it. I don't know. Project 2025, what's that all about? Well, obviously that fiction has been dispelled now, but whether it's Project 2025 and the prospect of many of those proposals being implemented, how do you feel the film plays now that the election has happened and we can very likely see further abortion access restrictions enacted?
I think it plays in a couple of different ways. I think it should be a warning to Americans across the country. I don't think any state is safe, even if your state has put in protections. If there is a federal abortion ban, it will affect everyone, and it could look like Texas. And so this isn't just a Texas issue or a 14 states that have abortion ban issue. It's an issue that affects every American. And as I think you see in this film, it's an issue that affects entire families. And for too long, men have not been part of the conversation. Either because they feel like I don't have a uterus, I shouldn't say anything, or because they don't understand it. But I think we really need men to be part of the conversation as well. But I also think that, and we've had multiple people say this, that if Amanda and all of her fellow plaintiffs can fight in a state like Texas, then even in this post-election, when there is a lot of fear, people can fight. And there are things that people can do. And I hope that people take that from this film.
And Amanda, we've certainly heard in recent years sort of people saying, well, the right is really not pro-life, they're pro-birth. But this film raises this question, it's not really pro-birth either.
No, I fail to see what their argument is at this point, other than just control. Because, they're certainly not pro-life. They're certainly not pro-birth. I mean, if you take my situation, I almost died. My daughter, had to have this, I can't get into it, but you saw. And as a result, I can probably not have children in the future. And so it's not pro-life, it's not pro-birth. There's just no thread of an argument there for me. And so what I think that means for me and a film like this one is that people just need to see the reality, because I have been doing advocacy work now for almost 2 years, And I have yet to meet one single person who hears my story and says, yeah, what happened to you is perfectly reasonable. That's acceptable. That's exactly what should have happened. So it's not a matter, in my mind, of changing people's minds. It's educating them and showing them what the reality is. And so that's what I think this film does so beautifully. When you look at my story, Samantha's story, and Austin's story, they're all so different, but they're all inarguable. And so I think it's just a matter of getting people to see the reality of what's going on.
Yeah, and maybe I could pose this to Abby, but I think we could debate as to whether the Harris campaign or say other senatorial campaigns did an adequate job of phrasing this issue. But, you know, I think women are dying. There was just a report last week by ProPublica of a third woman having died in Texas, a 35-year-old woman. And somehow this is oddly getting lost in it, that people are dying. It's shocking.
Yeah, I completely agree. That woman who passed away because she was denied care was actually in the neighborhood where my parents live. It was at the local hospital. And I cannot overstate how important it is that we talk about these stories. We need to elevate the fact that these women have lost their lives. These are mothers, these are wives, they're members of people's families, and they are gone because of bans like these. And it's just so critical that we start sharing our stories and really going, it's sort of hand-to-hand combat. You have to go one at a time and talk to people and share these stories. And if you don't have a story that you are comfortable sharing, use these stories that we've seen here, take them with you, carry them, and take them to other people. And it's about having these honest conversations. And when we debate abstractly, it usually goes nowhere. But when we talk about real people and what women are experiencing and what families are experiencing in Texas and in states across this country, it just shifts the conversation.
I wonder for anyone who would care to comment of what has been either most disturbing or rewarding in the process of both making the film and then bringing it out to the world.
Most disturbing, I can say that the first screening we did in Texas was a very special friends and family screening. It was invitation only, and then the second screening was open to the public in Austin. And the lawyer for the state of Texas who argued in Kate Cox's case came running into the screening. He wanted to see it. He watched it, stayed for the whole film, left during the credits, and, you know, nothing ever changed. So if he didn't understand their stories from the courtroom, he saw them at home in this film, and it didn't have any sort of impact. And so it really has to make you wonder what the point of the laws are. And, you know, I would say that for me is the most upsetting thing about making this film, is that I think both of us, maybe naively, because we wanted to see change, thought when we were going into the court that first day, like, okay, Amanda's getting on the stand and telling her story. Samantha's getting on the stand and telling her story. Austin too. And these stories are so compelling, so real. And then the state says, well, did Ken Paxton tell you couldn't have that abortion? We were all dumbfounded. And we just see those behaviors on repeat in the state. And so clearly, these stories aren't going to change those politicians' minds. And it's about, you know, looking at who else can run in place of those individuals so that we can change the laws.
Yeah, I thought it was what I would call sophistry of this sort of response. Like, you know, they're trying to blame it on the doctors, and well, why aren't you going after them? It's like, well, why don't you take some responsibility for writing a law that is unclear? I mean, you as legislators do not have any responsibility there, or people then charged with carrying out the law. So that personal level, I find that disturbing. I want to ask about the involvement of Hillary Clinton, Chelsea Clinton, and Hidden Light, and also Jennifer Lawrence and her production company. But first, to ask Amanda of what's it like to know that they're supporting you and supporting the film? I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yes, very cool. my first response when I found out was, Hillary Clinton knows my name. I was just floored. But through the screenings and some of the festivals, I've gotten to meet these amazing people in person, and I think what's been the most amazing thing to me is that they are as true and authentic and genuine in person as you would want them to be. And the saying where people are like, oh, don't meet your heroes. Well, I've met some of them and they are incredible. And I think what that says to me and speaks to is that folks who are in this fight, I continue to meet amazing people who are authentic and genuine, because I think once you're part of this fight, you do have sort of this community and this kinship, and so it's been really, really special. But still, I'll walk into a room, and even though I've met Hillary Clinton or Chelsea Clinton a handful of times now, I'm like, oh my God, Chelsea Clinton's right there, and you don't really get over it.
That's really pretty cool. But yeah, maybe Abby, you could talk about how Hidden Light, the production company founded by Hillary and Chelsea Clinton, and also Jennifer Lawrence, her production, how they became involved.
Yeah, from very early on, actually, before we even solidified what we were focusing this film on, our company and a company called Storyforce and then Hidden Light were each looking for post-Roe stories. And so we all kind of found each other as we were doing this research. And it was the day that Roe was overturned that we really solidified and said, let's do this together. We need to find a story and tell it together. And so they have been so supportive on this journey and letting us execute our creative vision. And what's been most incredible is just how much they've been champions of this film and have lent their platforms and their voices continuously to getting it out to the public. And then with Jennifer Lawrence's company, Excellent Cadaver, they came on later on. We showed them a very late cut of the film, and immediately they were just like, we're on board. Let's do this together. And so it really is just like such an honor to have them championing this film, and they've really just like stood there and raised the story up. And so it's been great.
Yeah, and a lot of times, executive producers may put their name on a film, and maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't that much. But you premiered a Telluride, and Secretary Clinton was right there with you on the stage at the Q&A. So that's some support.
It was incredible, and I think both Secretary Clinton and Chelsea bring so much to the discussions when we have post-screening conversations that they're a part of. And I think being able to hear from them, and Chelsea in particular, she has her PhD in public health, provides so much insight into what's happening. And it really has been just such an honor to be able to talk about this film with them and publicly and to audiences.
We see what happened as the case was brought before the Texas Supreme Court, but where do we go now in terms of the fight? Amanda, maybe I can ask you that, where we have the election of Donald Trump. I mean, we're going to see what results from that, but Republicans are in charge of both houses of Congress, and obviously there's a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, so I'm not sure there's a lot of optimism there, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think even as you're talking and laying out the framework for where we're headed in the next 4 years, or at least the next 2 years, intrinsically, I think, yeah, it's not looking so good. And then I have to tamp that down immediately. And I cannot let myself go to a dark space, and I hope none of us can, because the last thing that I think we can afford to do is give up hope, because when we give up hope, we stop fighting, and we just can't let that happen. And so I think we have to stay vigilant. I think we have to work harder. There are a number of paths that we can take in the next 2 to 4 years. I think specifically in Texas, as an example, one of the things that I think will be most crucial is fighting at the local level, because if things are going to be at the state level, and it's insane to me that that's the best case scenario, but the alternative is a national ban, right? And if it's still left up to the states, then we can fight at a local level. And I think that's what we're going to have to do in city councils, in your own congressional districts, I think that's going to be the most effective path moving forward.
Mentioned the premiere at Telluride. Before the election, you had special screenings around the country in battleground states, and we saw where in states where there were abortion measures on the ballot, by and large, access to abortion was approved. I mean, in the case of Florida, I mean, the bar was very high. It had to be over 60% or whatever. So, but, I'm curious about where you want to take the film next and whatever you might be able to say about distribution of the film.
Well, we want to make sure that the film is accessible to everyone. We think it's really important that people are able to see this. And so later this month, we'll start streaming online. And if you go to our website, zarowskivtexas.com, or any of our social channels, which are also zarowskivtexas.com, we'll update there when it is online and when it's available to be streamed.
Yeah, and I think we want to keep taking it to states that are talking about this, are currently handling these bans. And then also we've recently started going to universities, and I feel like that is so encouraging to be among young people who are dealing with these issues. I mean, we just did a screening at a university earlier this week, and it was sort of shocking to think about the women in the room were having to decide where to go to school and weigh in that decision whether the state has access to abortion, because you are stepping into a state where you might not have the same rights you grew up with. And so it is interesting to see young people engaging in this issue, and it's heartening. And you definitely need to be heartened right now. So.
And maybe as a final question I could ask both filmmakers, just maybe to speak about Amanda as the lead plaintiff in the case, someone who was willing to be out there to put her name on this case. I mean, far easier to not do that, and so many reasons not to, knowing that, you would be attacked. But maybe you could talk about her courage, which has continued in being front and center in your film.
Well, I think it goes back to us doing the research when we started looking at what was happening. I think we knew someone had to fight, but what was that fight going to look like, right? Roe v. Wade, Jane Roe was anonymous when that suit was filed. We didn't know if women were going to feel safe enough to come forward and use their names. And so I remember the first day that, reading that this suit had been filed and just feeling so proud to be a Texan and so just inspired to know that there was someone like Amanda out there. And we had been in touch with the center. We knew that there was going to be a case filed. But when it actually happened, it's one of the deepest honors of my life to be able to have been on this journey with you and to tell this story, because I think it takes immense courage, and you've never wavered in the face of that. And as a woman and just as an American, I'm just really inspired and honored to be able to have done this. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have to say one thing, just because I think the most surprising thing to me about making this film was how close we have become. And I did not expect to have two new sisters, family members, and I truly feel that way. I also just have to say that, yes, it is my name and you see my face, but there are 21 other plaintiffs on this suit, and there are also many other suits that are ongoing right now. And so I greatly appreciate your kind words, but please just know that it is not just me. It is so much bigger and so many more people. And so I just have to say, everyone is brave and courageous for coming for, and even the folks that are just having these conversations at their dinner table, they're just as brave.
Very well said. Well, let's give a round of applause to the filmmakers, Maisie Crow and Ivy Perot, and of course, Amanda Zarowski. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.